In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how to make a neckband that has a vertical column of knit stitches up from the center of the V. It's a little bit different than the way we normally make a neckband, so we're going to cover this in detail, step by step. I have made a little sample V-neck, a very small one, but the technique will be exactly the same if we were working on even a large adult-sized sweater. This front has an odd number of stitches. I have taken the center stitch off on a pin. It's a live stitch, and we're going to need to keep it live. And then I have decreased up each side of the neck with a transfer tool. First thing I'm going to do is get this back on the bed. The live stitch goes on needle 1, right of center 0. And then I'm going to pick up 3 stitches per every 4 rows from the point of the V up to the shoulder. I'm trying to make sure that I get both bars of that outer stitch. So pick up 3 and then skip 1. Okay, that gets the left side. Now I'm going to do the right side. Pick up 3, and I'm going to skip 1. If this was a garment, if it was a raglan sweater, you would have the sleeve here, a sleeve here, and then a back. We normally put the seam on the left raglan back. So by starting with a sleeve, the front, a sleeve, and the back, that makes it come out correctly. Now it's very important that we keep this center stitch marked all the way through because we're going to transfer stitches onto it. Decreasing as we make the front neck. So I need a piece of contrast color yarn. I'm going to make a yarn marker. Okay, here's our center stitch. It's needle 1, right of center 0. Now I've reached into the row below the center stitch and I've gone behind the stitch and come out. I've not gone through it, I've gone around it. Pull the yarn marker through, and then I'm going to fasten a clothespin on the end. A clip of any kind that will hold the yarn would work. You just need something to keep the yarn tails down out of the way. Now let's set the row counter. we need to get 8 rows in the band and then 1 loose row for the bind off. So I'm going to begin by bringing everything forward. That just makes it a little bit easier for the carriage to knit this first row. I'm going to knit the first row at the same tension that I knitted the garment at. So in this case it's tension 7, knit 1 row. It's going to be a little tight, but it will go across. Now inspect this carefully to make sure everything knitted. Now that we know everything's correct, I'm going to knit 1 more row. Okay, here's our center stitch. You can see the column drops down onto where the marker is. I'm going to transfer the stitch immediately to the right of it onto that center needle. And then I'm also going to transfer the stitch immediately to the left. We now have 3 stitches on this needle. I'm going to transfer it to the right. We now have 2 empty needles. This would be the shortest side of the work, assuming that this is a raglan, and there would be a sleeve here, and the front here, and then a sleeve, and then the back. So this side is the shortest side. Therefore, this is the side we're going to move. Move all the stitches inwards. Now, you can usually skip over 2 empty needles. If your yarn is too stiff, and it absolutely will not stretch that far, then you're going to have to move this in 2 groups. In other words, you're going to move 1 stitch over all the way up, and then you're going to go back and knit it, or then you're going to go back and transfer again. The goal is to fill in everything again so that you have solid fabric, and here's your center stitch with 3 stitches. Hand knitters call this a central double decrease. And when you turn the work over after it comes off the machine, this needle will stay as a knit stitch. Okay, turn your tension dial down 1 click. That is 1 dot between numbers on an LK150. On a metal bed machine, there are 2 dots between numbers. A lot of people call that a click because it normally makes a little sound when you turn the dial. Okay, this time I'm going to knit 1 row. And I am going to drop and relatch a rib stitch, a knit stitch. And I'm going to put it on that center needle. I'm going to do the same thing on the left. Ravel it down to the garment, to the neck edge, latch that empty column back up, and again place that last stitch on the center stitch. Now transfer that center stitch to the right. And again, we need to transfer all the stitches on the left side. Move them in towards the center. The air is full of static in my knitting room today, and it's making the latches behave not very well. So this is a trick I've learned. When the latches won't stay open, If I bring them forward just a little ways, the stitches then hold the latches down, and it's much easier to get onto the transfer tool. So again, just bring them forward a little ways. Okay. Now, I have found that if I tried to make the decreases every other row on the neckband, sometimes I get a little bubble right here in the neckband itself. That's because this edge on the garment is at a slightly different decrease rate than the neckband. And so there's more fabric forming in here than it would take to make a sharp little V. By alternating, making the decreases on every second row and then every row, it tightens that V together and normally will prevent a little bubble from forming. One row. Oh, I'm sorry, we just did one row. So now I'm going to knit 2 rows. Turn the tension dial down. I should have done that before I knitted that row, but I'm not going to take it back out. Turning that tension dial a little tighter also helps pull the V together, and that will make it lie flatter on your chest and neck. That's called tension control shaping, and we use it on a lot of things. Neckbands in particular is one that I like it on. This is the center stitch. I skipped the one immediately beside it, and I've dropped the second stitch over. Ravel it back to the garment, and then latch up as a knit stitch. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Again, this is the center stitch. Skip this one, and then drop this one. Ravel it down, and latch it back up. Now we need to decrease. Now this was a mistake, but this is what would happen if your yarn will not stretch over 2 empty needles. I have already transferred everything on this side once, but since I still have an empty needle, I have to go back and do it again because we need to get that hole filled in. Okay, that looks better. Here's our center stitch, and these are knit stitches as we've been transferring. and into 2 rows. Now I'm getting away from the center, but it's easier for me to keep track of what I'm doing if I drop and relatch the ribbing on every other needle as I go. Mostly because I can see it a little better. This is where the original one was from the row below, or from 2 rows below. But I need to complete this column. And I will also need to complete this column. There's our center stitch, and this is the pair of knit stitches on each side of it. I'm also going to go ahead and drop this one now. Now you wouldn't have to do this. You can drop and relatch these stitches as you need to use them, as you need to move them inwards for the decreases. I just like to do that as I go because seeing these columns develop helps me keep track of where I am. Here's our center stitch again. So, transfer the right one onto it, transfer the left one onto it. Again, there are now 3 stitches on this center needle. Move it to the right. So now we have 2 needles out of work. This time I'm going to try to be a little more careful and skip over both empty needles. It is tight. So really it would be up to you if you prefer to make the decreases in 2 steps. Now, I'm on row 7. I've just completed row 7. Made the decreases. Turn the tension dial down. Again, 1 click. And I'm going to knit 1 row. I am going to bind off using the stitch through stitch method. If you're a hand knitter, you could certainly remove this onto a circular needle at this point and do the bind off by hand. But we're going to do it stitch through stitch. So turn the tension dial up to 9 or as high as it will go and knit 1 row. I am going to complete the ribbing on these stitches. Now I found that on some garments it needs to have another decrease in here as we go across. This is a sample and I haven't tried it yet, so I'm not sure what will happen. Sometimes you really don't need it, and sometimes it's better to put it in. At this point, I'm going to pull out that contrast color. We really don't need it any longer. We have to complete the knit 1 purl 1 ribbing. So drop and relatch every other stitch, latching it back up as a knit stitch. Knit stitch as it faces you. It will be a purl stitch on the other side of the fabric. Your pattern will tell you how many stitches to pick up along the front edge. Now, this was a sample, and I didn't take the time to compute it exactly. I should have picked up 1 more stitch here. You can see this little knot. I should have picked up a stitch there, and then I would have had 3 more stitches. I have ended up with just 2. Do not try to convert this stitch. It's almost impossible, and you're likely to have such a problem, you'll end up ripping everything out. So if you end up with 2 stitches there, that's fine. Now I'm going to do a stitch through stitch bind off. You'll see people on YouTube pulling all of the needles forward and then pulling the stitches through. My hands don't work well anymore. There is nerve damage, and I do not feel things anymore. And I can't tell sometimes what my hands are doing. So this method gives me a little more control. I can leave the stitches in the hook and then pop them out. It's a little slower than pulling them off extended needles, but every time that I now try to do this bind off with extended needles, I end up dropping a lot. So for me, even though this is slightly slower to latch, I don't drop the stitches, or very rarely drop the stitches. What I'm doing is inserting the hook into the stitch, letting the latch close, pulling it through the stitch that was on the latch hook, and then just lifting up. And the stitches will come right out of the hook. If you're used to doing it the other way, by all means continue. There's no one way to do anything in knitting. I know some teachers say, do it my way because this is the way. It isn't. It is their way. And it may be the way that works best for them. But there's always another way to do everything. And you may find yourself things that nobody else has ever been teaching. Okay, this is what the neckband looks like on the purl side. And this is what it looks like on the knit side. You see this nice little center stitch with all of the stitches going towards it in decreases. You will have a seam somewhere in the neckband, and normally on a raglan it will be on the back left side. So that would have been what this yarn tail would have been used for, would be to sew up that raglan seam. Okay, now even this one, of course, it needs to be blocked. And if it's wool, you could definitely use a little bit of steam on it. But you can see how even with this one, there's a tiny bit that wants to bubble up here. And that was what I was talking about, that I might have needed to make one more decrease on each side here as I was binding off, because you can see just this tiny, tiny little bit that wants to lift. I hope you found this helpful, and happy knitting.